The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
It might be that I had watched too many of those TV crime shows in the past. You know, the whodunit mysteries, the good cop, bad cop stories, the shows that have twists around every corner, and those ones that leave you hanging and thinking at the end of every show. I always knew I was in trouble if one of those shows came on TV, because it meant that I was stuck for the next hour because I had to see how it turned out. And if you've ever watched any of these types of crime shows, especially the ones where the suspects end up going to trial, you know that very few of them ever admit their guilt to the crime. The charge of guilt usually comes from the hero, the main character investigator who solved the crime. Any sort of admission of guilt from the guilty one usually only comes out of a bribe or some sort of deal, right? I mean, it seems like it's rare in those shows to ever see the suspect admit their guilt or be utterly remorseful for what they've done. So every time that I hear Psalm 51 read, the psalm that we hear every Ash Wednesday, the psalm that starts our Lenten journey, I'm completely struck at how remorseful the psalmist is for what they've done. I'm not used to hearing that kind of confession. Blot out my offenses. Wash me from wickedness. Cleanse me from sin. I mean, that psalmist bears it all right from the beginning. The psalmist is sick to their stomach with guilt, and they are pleading with God for forgiveness. So every time I hear Psalm 51, I wonder, is that what Lent is about? Literally, the first words that are spoken as part of our worship together, the first words that lead us into our Lenten season every single year are, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love." Have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy on us, O God. Blot out our offenses. Wash us through and through from our wickedness. Cleanse us from our sin. Here we are, God, a bunch of sinners unable to do anything else but come to you for forgiveness. But actually, we are able to do a lot of other things than simply coming before God and pleading for forgiveness and cleansing. And that's probably why we have to go through this year after year in Lent. Which is why in Lent we are afforded this time and opportunity to get to the heart of our humanity and our identity in God. Which is why we start every Lent with the words of Psalm 51. Because that psalm has something to teach us. This psalm is known as a lament psalm because, obviously, the writer is lamenting their situation and their sinfulness to God. And without that ability to lament or offer our laments to God or even shout them at God, we lose the ability to have a genuine relationship with God. Because the only thing we think we're allowed to do is say that everything is hunky-dory. Without lament, we think that we can't tell God what we're truly feeling or confess our hurts and our troubles, knowing full well that God already knows all of that. So I think this psalm helps remind us that we can do just those things, lament and confess to God. But it's also important to notice something else about this lament psalm. As we read further and further into the psalm, you might have begun to notice that the language of sin and guilt became less, and the language about what God was doing became more. We started to see that sin disappeared in the second half of the psalm in nearly the same ratio that God appeared. So that psalm is showing us that our sin is being replaced with God's presence. And that right there is precisely what Lent is about. We use this time to strip away our sinfulness, which allows us to make room for God's presence. Again, we hear the psalmist say, "Remove my sins with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be purer than snow. Create in me a clean heart, O God." This isn't a prayer for a simple rinse or a bath. This is begging God to scrub us clean. This is the type of washing that was done when they pounded their clothes on the river stones to wash them. This was the type of ritual cleansing that was done after they had skin diseases or bodily discharges so that that person could return to the community. This was the type of cleansing that doesn't just clear away the sin, it cleanses and prepares the actual person in the cleansing as well. But before we can even think about cleansing, we have to start here, in the dirt, in the dust, and the ashes. Part of our lament comes by reminding ourselves that we as human beings are nothing more than some dirt and dust that God has formed into a living and breathing being. We often try to act like we're more than that. We often try to act like we ourselves are a God, but we're not. And we have to be reminded of that from time to time so that God's presence can take hold and do more within us. So we walk around with dirty black ashes rubbed into the living skin of our foreheads so that we can get a sense of that humbleness. Don't forget, too, that the ashes on our forehead aren't merely a smudge, they are in the form of a cross. Those crumbly ashes point to our finite earthly existence, as well as the weight and pain of that sin. The cross that they're shaped into, though, points to the infinite promises of a God who is with us in all that we do. The finite points to the infinite. Our mortal existence is tied to those eternal promises. All of this, is what Lent is about. On those days when we think we have it all figured out and yet everything still seems to come crashing down, Lent gives us the time to remind ourselves that we are not God. On the days when we experience so much pain and agony, we are reminded to give those things to God so that God can fill in around them and around you so that you can experience God's presence. And on the days when we are weighted down with sin and wickedness, those ashes remind us of our humble origin. Lent points us to God's presence, whether it's in the bread and the wine or the meals that we share, or in the dirt and the ashes that are of our lives. We know that God is with us in this journey. Amen.